Hello everyone, thank you for your patience. This is the Nutrition and Wellbeing panel at the ESI Digital Summit. Basically, we've assembled the Avengers of esports performance and wellbeing, as well as myself for some reason, but we're going to discuss everything esports performance in the time we can. Instead of butchering everybody's introductions, I'd like everybody to introduce themselves and what they do and kind of how they fit into the whole esports performance side of things. So we'll start with Skyler, and Taylor, and then Ryan, if possible.
Hey, what's up? Name is Skyler Johnson, and just honored to be here. First of all, thank you so much for ESI Digital Summit. Is awesome. Glad to be part of it. Former professional gamer, 13-year experience inside, I guess, the esports space in general, as well as CEO of and co-founder of Control. Been dabbling a little bit, so thank you again, Adam.
I can go next. My name is Taylor Johnson. Performance coach. Backgrounds in athletic performance. I coached in college and the NFL for 10 years and committed to sports and gaming and have looked at excellence.
Over to me.
Come on, Ryan, mate.
No, I just want to say thanks very much for having me in ESI. I really appreciate it. It's great to be a part of this panel. So my name's Ryan Scollan. I'm the CEO and co-founder of G-Science. I'm a sports scientist by trade. And what we're trying to do at G-Science is to make esports a healthier and happier place for all esports athletes.
Lovely stuff. So we'll get right into it, waste no time. So I've always thought that players are the product when it comes to esports. They're where the value lies. Typically, obviously, there's peripheral companies around it, but really the players are where the value is. And as such, I believe it's important that we treat them as products and ensure that we treat them as well as possible and ensure that they can go on and do their thing to the best of their ability for as long as possible. And Skyler, obviously, being a former professional player yourself and then founding Team Envy, what's your perspective on that? Do you agree or am I way off?
Could you be?
Okay, yeah. Do you think we should be treating players as products and making sure that they're around for as long as possible and playing to the best of their ability at all times?
Yeah, wait. I'm gonna need you to say it one more time. I promise I'm gonna get this right. I just gotta hear you better, Adam. We got a little
microphone down. The microphone
it's your mic,
up,
Adam.
pull it down.
No,
It's your mic.
no.
Oh, okay.
Boom, micing.
Is this any better?
Yeah, I think it's
You shouldn't
okay.
be coming through this.
Now I think it's a little bit better. Yeah.
Okay, well, I apologize. Basically, I was just saying I believe players should be treated as products in a sense. They're where the value lie in esports, and thus we need to ensure that they are performing to the best of their ability for as long as possible. And obviously, your experience both as a player and a team owner, would you agree with that?
Of course, yeah. I think personal health and wellness for the players, mentally as well as physically, is something that I think is just still in its infancy, about to be explored. I think people are taking great steps towards getting to that ability yet. Every other day, I'm seeing a new team or organization really pop up and say, "Hey, we're gonna step up." There's something to be said that hasn't been explored yet, which is still in the what does a player's performance look like in 10 years, right? What does that post career look like? And that's the part that I think we need to address, whether it's arthritis and just a bunch of different things. That I think is something outside of what's happening now. We should start to look towards the future already, because we don't want to, okay, we're really focused on this personal health and wellness side, mentally, physically, et cetera. But then we get to a point in 10 years where, wow, my wrist is really breaking down, or my hand, because I'm not gonna lie to you, sometimes I have the same thing being former pro. It's like you scrim for so long a day, and then you just get to play that match. Those tournaments are just as long. Yeah, super important.
And obviously, Taylor, on your end, before being at State Space, you were working with players like some of the best in the world. They're the most popular players. And so you know about creating the right environment and such, and making sure that they're put in a position to succeed. So can you tell us a little bit about how you've managed to do that and what you think the right environment is?
Yeah, so with State Space, we're a neuroscience and gaming company. And what we do is develop the training software for first-person shooters and create that realistic training environment so that they can be more successful in the game. So that's from, the in-game mechanics standpoint. But when you think about outside of the mechanics and thinking from a holistic point of view and how you want to shape the environment so that an individual could be the most successful, you have to think about these buckets around lifestyle, mindset, nutrition, movement, recovery. And these are kind of like the overarching themes that when you want to think about, like, how do you want to create this environment so that somebody can play the best consistently. And like Skyler said, I mean, it's this continuum, this arc of this player's trajectory from when they first start playing, it's aspiring pro to become pro, and life after. So I think, in terms of shaping the environment, it's really first understanding the individual and understanding the team and the resources that are available to that individual and that team, and having an open conversation and understanding and meet them where they're at per their education level, in terms of education meaning and training level based on where they're at currently. And then from there, you can start to build out these programs and start to bring in different resources to help guide them in the right direction.
Okay, and Ryan, are you working with players a lot, right? I believe you are.
Yeah, we're very much, we take a very similar kind of training philosophy to what Taylor does as well. Like, I think it's super important to understand the player as an individual, and that you can't just take a one size fits all approach in esports or in traditional sports as well. So I think it's really about truly understanding the demands being placed on esports athletes. And I think, just touching on what Skyler said there, one of the biggest issues right now in esports is the fact that it's quite a new performance domain. So in traditional sports, you have, 100 years, let's say, of sports science literature there. So if I want to train you to be a sprinter, Adam, if you ever fancy a change, I know what training program to put you on to give you them results. But the thing is, with esports, there's no proven training methodology right now, and we're all just trying to explore and better understand what's the best way to approach this. So what Skyler was saying in terms of that, the 10-year effect, or what am I going to look like in 10 years, no one really knows right now, because we haven't been collecting that kind of data on the players. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do at G Science. Is we believe that a lot of these issues can be solved, and a lot of the problems around kind of burnout and mental health and injuries, through understanding the data. So by having access to longitudinal data, we can see insights and trends and patterns, so that we can then make changes to make sure that we're optimizing both players' health and their in-game performance.
Okay, and how exactly would you go about, for example, say, replicating the competitive environment with the stresses that they're facing while actually competing, as well as when they're practicing? So I imagine it's two different levels of performance and kind of the states that are in there, right? Like Skyler, could you speak a little bit on that? Is it a very different atmosphere when you are practicing and when you're actually competing, and or do you face the same kind of challenges, as a player?
I think repetition is what it comes down to, right? And it's same with traditional sports. Playing traditional sports and then obviously being a pro in the video game industry has been the same exact for me in terms of just repetition, right? So for that, a lot of that comes down to mental. I think the scrimming capacity it's just grueling. It's more mental than physical, obviously, at first. And then you get to a point where your physical starts to catch up. And maybe that's just from me getting to experience what it was like to get old in the space before some of the young guns came up, right? And when that happened, you just can't compete the same. You can't challenge the same, right? Like there's certain gunfights that you know that you shouldn't try to win. So you got to play smarter, right? And I think as your progression of a pro and just as a human, right? Like you just start to learn what's working for me, what's right. But I think the mental era, mental for me is bigger than physical for the first 5 years, and then 5 years post is when I started to worry about, okay, now my health and wellness is a big deal in terms of just being physical, my hands hurting, etc. Because it's like 8-hour scrim days compared to a tournament where you could really only play one game that matters on a Friday. Unless you're like an amateur competing through an open bracket, then you might as well just get the ice packs ready, because it's going to be a long day always, so.
Okay, so when you're optimizing performance, you're also being mindful of the impact further down the line. And obviously, as Ryan said, there's not always the data there. There's not the data there at the moment to know exactly how things are being impacted. But how much does that play a role in what you come up with at state space? Like ensuring that like the longevity of players is catered to?
Yeah, good question. So from the standpoint of what we do at StateSpace with our platform AMAD, it's a testing and diagnostic tool. So it's using the same psychomotor tasks you find in a neuroscience lab and looking at these domains around perception, cognition, and motor skills. And so if you track that data over time, you can actually see drop-offs in performance. You can see different trends in terms of speed, precision, accuracy, and reaction time. And so if you were to take that in the context of working backwards from game day or working backwards from these major tournaments and start to look at that data over time, you can see how much practice is really starting to push you the edge and where's the point of diminishing returns. And Skyler brings up a great point. I mean, the whole mindset around how you set your mind and then how you go into the match and how you debrief, I mean, that stuff's really important. And having that rich data set to be able to look at the trajectory over time is really valuable as well. So specifically for, in-game performance, the best practice is going to come from, doing very high quality scrims with high quality opponents. And then when you get to game day, you execute. And it's about consistency. It's about building consistency of habits over time that turn into that performance lifestyle that leads you up to those matches when you build consistency with those matches over time. And then as you work backwards from that, you think about, okay, well, how do you mix and match? So maybe something I've always been a fan of is talking about periodizing your training. So you're not doing the same sort of scrims every single day. Maybe it's not the same amount of scrims every single day. Maybe you start to manipulate the volume. So you have these different variables: volume, density, intensity, and frequency. Right? Same thing in traditional sports applies, right? It's all the same stuff. Training is training. So if you were to take certain type of match days, and if you were to say, okay, well, on this day I want to hit X amount of scrims or this amount of time, you can do that one day, but then you want to start, maybe the next day you do something slightly different. Maybe you decrease your training load, the training time, and then you do more of your individual skills training. So you start to you do the same sort of amount each day, but you start to change the variables within those days. So you still have a technically 8-hour workday, but you're working a little bit smarter, and you could potentially avoid that burnout and that cognitive fatigue, that cognitive load, because it's not the same repetition every single day. And I think, Skyler could speak to this as well. I think a lot of young players, they feel they have to just grind the game. And that's a lot of where they get like that game sense as well, because they're exposed to so many different variables. And chances are they're not going to see the same exact instance ever again, but they might get something close. And I think that might be like that addictive loop in trying to continue to grind the game, because they get more exposure when they have the sense of like, oh, I've been here before. But then you got to ask the question, at what point is it too much, or what point is it like this drop off and diminishing returns? And that's still to be determined. That's where a lot of the whole esports performance and a lot of the data analytics is coming into play, because we could start to think more methodically about how are we tracking this information over time, and then looking at objective and subjective information, overlapping the two, and then we get a more clear picture, especially when we start to look at game day performance.
Have you got anything to add on that at all, Ryan?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. So some of the points that you touched upon there, Taylor, especially around load monitoring, is something that's quite new in esports, but obviously quite frequently used in physical and traditional sports, let's say. And one thing that we're really interested in is trying to better understand what load does 8 to 12 hours a day place on an esports athlete, and how do we better prepare athletes to deal with that. And a lot of things that we've experienced is, a lot of players don't want to stop playing the game, and we're never going to tell you to stop playing your game. But if we can't get them to stop playing 8 to 12 hours a day, how can we focus on optimizing their recovery? And that's what we try to focus on as well when we're working with these players is, okay, you're going to play 8 to 12 hours a day and you're not going to listen to us, but at least focus on your recovery so that the next time you come back in the sticks, you're going to be better, in a better physiological and psychological state to be able to perform your best. So I think that's one thing. The other thing that like to touch on is the burnout side of things as well. The reason why people burn out is, it kind of comes in three forms. You've got the psychological, you got the physiological, and you got the emotional state of burnout. And that's, it's kind of being exposed to prolonged stress over a period of time. And what I've seen so far from my experiences working with the players are, when you have an environment where there's high challenge and low support, and then you also have high stress and lack of coping mechanisms, that's when we're seeing players burning out. And I think when we talk about kind of the environment and building that supportive environment, I think that's one thing that esports orgs really need to spend time and actually invest in is esports athletes are the kind of key to the ecosystem. Without them, there is no esports. But what shocks me is that a lot of organizations don't see the importance of investing in their health and wellness. If you were to take the time and actually work with practitioners and put these foundations in place, you're going to build up players that are healthier, happier, and ultimately more successful. If they're more successful, it's going to be a greater return on investment for your financial needs as an org as well. So I think there's a lot that can be said about that. But I think, yeah, just to kind of summarize that, we really need to focus more as an industry on understanding the optimal training protocols to better understand the demands and pressures being placed on esports athletes, and then working together with organizations to be able to create high performance environments that supports and fosters positive physical, mental health, and also optimizing performance.
Okay, and I think discussing nutrition and esports, I'd be remiss to not bring up caffeine and energy drinks, right? We see there are plenty of organizations and leagues out there that are in partnerships with brands that we will not mention that are high in caffeine. And Skyler, I want to get your take on that. Obviously, you've got a past in working for an energy drink company, and you're doing things a little bit differently now. So why have you gone the direction you've gone in, and how does it impact you when you were playing?
So when I first retired, my biggest thing was, what am I going to do next? And the thought of getting into an energy drink space and providing what I thought was a healthy alternative, comparative to a canned energy drink packed with sugar, it screamed great for me. It was one of those things where it's like, okay, if we could promote a product that is better than what the traditional option is, but it's not best, right? So if it gets to a point now where we're providing the best options and we're educating on what that could look like, the caffeine thing is just interesting because people, especially in the United States, are just chugging caffeine daily, right? And you're not really paying attention to what's going into your body and how that can affect what's going out, right? Like a lot of the people, daily consumer, if you go to them and say, hey, what does that caffeine actually do to you? How does that fatigue your brain? How does that fatigue anything? A lot of those answers are just like, oh, it gets me up. Oh, it gives me energy. Oh, coffee has a stigma of I drink it in the morning for X. And that, I don't know, is okay with anything, because imagine the foods, if you have that same mindset traditionally, which people do, it's like you don't know what that's doing to you. And from a performance standpoint, it's ginormous. And I think as we're probably going to touch on is the staggering of caffeine, right? That's something that we should all chat about, because it's going to be something that's not yet to be explored, and especially in the gaming space. I think we could actually revolutionize that, and we could talk about how maybe the gamers are the first culture to really break out of the caffeine stigma. When's the proper time, right? Instead of just drinking it when you wake up, maybe that's not so good. Maybe you let your brain wake up first, instead of trying to supply like a surge of energy. Yeah.
Taylor, is caffeine really as bad as people may think it is? I, for one, try and avoid it now. But you'll know a lot better than I. Is it really like a damaging substance for gamers and stuff? Or is it maybe not the most productive means of getting your energy and such?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's so much there. The caffeine definitely has effects. Definitely has some positive effects, right? And I think really in thinking about what's best for an individual, I would say that most people first should start with getting more sleep and see how that feels, and then understand what that clean energy is. And then once you start to get more sleep, then you can start to say, okay, well, what is it like to have a caffeine supplement to get me up to a different level? But I think first starting with just the whole the consumption of caffeine, or the overconsumption of caffeine. I mean, most individuals consume far more than they probably should, but then they become habituated to that level. So then when they wake up in the morning, like Skyler talked about, rather than just kind of letting themselves wake up naturally, they're like, wow, I have a headache, or I feel off. Them feeling off is trying to get back up to the baseline of whatever they had put themselves at with that consistent caffeine consumption. So I think getting people to just understand the pros and cons of caffeine in general, and how it could be highly addictive in the sense that you need it to feel yourself. And in reality, you feeling yourself, you shouldn't have any caffeine. You shouldn't need any caffeine for that matter. Now, full disclaimer, I drink caffeine, but I also take caffeine detoxes where I won't have caffeine for a period of time and completely come off it, so I could reset my baseline. Like, okay, yeah, maybe I was getting a little bit out of hand with caffeine for this month. Okay, so let me back off a little bit. So I think just having the general self-awareness is really important. But far too often people don't really go to that step. They just think they pay more and more and more. Because also gaming is a highly competitive endeavor, right? So when you're competing at the highest level, or anything for that matter, and you're just going through your life in general, it can be highly competitive. So people want to be at their best. And what it tends to do is just perpetuate the cycle of not getting enough rest and recovery, like Ryan was talking about. And then you try to take supplements, whatever it is, to kind of get back to feeling at your best. And I think that's where it really starts, is reestablishing the baseline. And then once you can do that, then you can start to play around with, okay, what is optimizing from baseline?
Okay, and in the spirit of ensuring that the panels are going along at a decent enough space, and I believe we have to wrap it up quite soon. I want to ask Ryan, if you could change one thing tomorrow among all pro players, the infrastructure, all the organisations, in a way to to improve performance, like, or to be healthier in general, like, what would you do? Give me your grand vision and how
You're giving me the drop mic moment here.
Of course.
Yeah, I mean, listen, if I had a magic wand here, I would change a lot of things. But I think in reality, for me, it's about just esports athletes and orgs being more open-minded and trying to develop more self-awareness about the problems in esports. My biggest thing is that these problems around poor physical and mental health, the lack of support, and all these other issues, they're only going to get worse. And if we don't actually focus on solving these now at the root, before more people get into esports, before it gets more competitive and people are pushed even harder, we're going to see a lot of cracks throughout the whole industry, and we're going to see a lot more players burning out and having to retire early. And to me, that's pretty devastating. So my kind of like war cry would be, let's all work together. Let's really focus on driving the esports health and wellness sector forward. And if that's through collaboration with universities, other esports partners, whatever it may be, let's just be open-minded. Let's listen to the educators and let's work together to make it a healthier and happier place.
Okay, and I would ask Skyler the same thing, but he would just say, go and buy his product. So I wouldn't do that. No, but I understand it's a shorter panel, and I want to make it clear that everybody on this panel is incredibly friendly and seemingly open to conversation. I have spoken to them on numerous times outside of things, so if anybody does have any questions, of course, then reach out and obviously my panelists right here. If you don't want that, then come and have a go at me. But obviously putting that out there. No, I mean, there's seemingly a lot to go on this topic, but what we are seeing a trend of is people being hired specifically for performance in esports. You've seen Excel and Team Vitality, and obviously Taylor was there with Dr. Gaming and such. Like, it's seemingly like we're taking steps forward. I'm not an expert in the space by any means, but I do know what I see going on a day-to-day basis, right, in terms of the hires and departmental changes and such. And while things are obviously not perfect, it seems like if everybody's more open to listening and collaborating and experimenting and employs all you guys basically and listens to what you're saying, instead of just assuming they know best, or they can just grind for 12 hours non-stop, sleep for 4 and just relax for the rest. Like, it seems like there's a bit of forward momentum with positive change, at least, which I feel is obviously a great thing. But yeah, there's so much more we could get into, and the different avenues such as Adderall usage in esports and such, which deserves its panel of its own, to be completely honest with you. But I feel that we need to wrap it up because of the time constraints. But I want to thank you all for coming on. You're all great at what you do, and again, I encourage anybody watching, listening, to get in touch with them, check out what they're doing online. They're all doing amazing things at their respective companies, and if anything, they make me feel like I'm not doing enough. So that says it all.
Really appreciate it.
And I believe that is the end. I believe. If not, then we can keep going.
I appreciate Esports Insider for having us on.
Thank you all. Thank you very much, everyone.
You crushed.